Just before the break, Karl and I were talking about his journey, how he went from Foschini to RCS, and we're about to segue from how he and the management team built RCS to close on 800 people to what he does today, which is Retail Capital. So would you, for our viewers, just give us a sense of how you went from RCS and then into what you do now, which is the CEO of Retail Capital?
Okay, so the RCS business got to a size where we now had large institutional shareholders, both Foschini, and we brought Standard Bank in. And as an entrepreneur, I had no more equity. I sold my equity out at that time. And so I had a 3-year period to work out, and when I left, I wanted to build stuff again. And it's hard to build in a large structure where you have institutional shareholders. So I went out my own again, and I invested in 6 or 7 different businesses over a period of time. The ones where I had some industry understanding were successful in various forms. Where I had no industry understanding, I failed dismally.
What'd you learn there?
Stick to what you know. It's very tempting when you've exited a business to say, I'd love to solve a new problem. But the reality is you don't actually have that deep understanding of how things work.
Trust me, I get it, brother.
So I went back into the lending space, financial services space.
Have you read The Richest Man in Babylon?
No.
Oh, man. So I'm going to gift you the book. It's a really good book, but it was the very first business book I ever read. And the book is about the fellow who was the richest man in Babylon. And he tells in the book stories about how he made wealth. But it all keeps coming down to the same thing. Stick to what you know.
Absolutely.
Invest in what you know, you put money behind what you know, and then you manage and worry about what you know. And so his whole thing was, whereas the rest of my friends are diversifying into things they knew nothing about, I just plowed down a path of something I understood, and that's how I accumulated this amount of wealth, right? So you finish at retail, at RCS, you invest in these 7 businesses. Some do well, some less so. And you're in this hiatus now. Where does Retail Capital pop up?
So, having built business before, I was called by some in the industry to say, is a cool idea, and can they meet for coffee, and can we talk about whether it's doable?
Yes.
And this particular person had built a business before, was now living in working in Joburg, living in Cape Town and commuting, and wanted to get back to Cape Town. So the 3 of us sat down, had coffee, had breakfast, and he said there's a business opportunity to lend to SME retail, which doesn't exist in South Africa and doesn't make sense. And it's basically lending against cash flows. Banks lend against balance sheets. They lend against assets. So if you want to go and borrow money from the bank, the first thing they say is, what collateral do you have? And if you don't have collateral, then unless you've got a super bulletproof business plan and credibility and they're not going to lend it to you. It was a great idea. So we said, let's give it a go. And Dave, in that case, was going to run it day to day to move back to Cape Town. He was going to run the business. So we became investors, shareholders in the business. I played the chairman role. So I was actively involved in the first year in terms of setting up the concept, finding funding for it, hiring people, etc., etc. And then I left it to Dave. The last thing you want in a business is 2 bosses. One person's got to make the call every day. And so I was happy to play the sounding board role for Dave, but I didn't want to start getting involved in the day-to-day running operations because it undermines Dave. So he ran that for 3.5 years. And then he decided he wanted to go and sail. So he did the Clipper race, around the world yacht race, and it's a year-long process. So he stepped down, sold his equity, moved back to the UK, and then did his sailing trip. And I was busy exiting another business, and Retail Capital was a large part of my investment, a lot of my portfolio. So I said, well, there's no better person to run it than myself, than trying to find another CEO and trying to look over their shoulder. So I stepped back in about 2.5 years ago.
Was it a difficult decision for you to make to become executive again?
It wasn't, and probably because I'd watched Retail Capital grow, and I had views on how I think things should be different. And it was easier to step in myself and make those changes.
At a philosophical, thematic level, have you ever battled with old behaviors that keep you back? So a way you used to work that doesn't work for the environment you're in now?
Me personally, or the environment?
No, you.
I don't think about those things.
So I just want to make sure I get it. So at every time the business has grown, you just naturally adjusted to, well, it's grown now. I've got to be this type of leader or this kind of boss, not the one I was yesterday.
I think because I'm always growing the business, I think I'm setting the agenda. Does that make sense?
No.
So I'm not sure. I think I'm quite adaptable anyway to any environment.
Sure.
So I don't think I have one particular style. I tend to adapt my style according to what's there.
I see.
But I'm also setting the agenda. So when I step back in here, for instance, it was a very structured, rigid organization that was living a bit in the past. Legacy systems, legacy thinking. Culturally, people weren't having fun. People were being watched and so on. And I saw a different picture. In my picture, people needed to enjoy coming to work, not come to work because they need to be at work. They need to embrace technology, which they weren't. They needed to diversify distribution channels in terms of new segments. They needed to embrace partnerships. So at that stage, it was retail capital only. So how do we go and partner with a Yoko and a Corker and a SureSwipe and so on? So I had a different picture of the business. And so I suppose I had an agenda when I stepped in, and it was about imparting that picture. And you can't overload the organization with a picture on day one. You can't sort of say to them, we're here now, we're going to be there in 2 years' time, because people don't make that leap so quickly. So
it's too radical a leap.
Exactly. So you have to feed it into the system. So you're saying the starting point was how are we going to fix our sales process? So then we focus on sales. And then how are we going to fix our back office administration? We focus on back office administration. Then how are we going to fix our distribution? And then we pick partnerships. So it's been a journey through that process.
How do you, because I battle with this, how do you remember what the picture is? So typically for me, when I start something, when I start getting into something, the clearest picture I'll have of it is week one. Because I'm removed enough to see the blind spots and the gaps.
Sure.
But once I get immersed in it, sometimes I forget that, there was this part of the puzzle there. So how do you draw it down? Do you write it down? Or do you just have a gift for remembering what the end goal is all the time?
So I have a mental picture that's very simple, if it makes sense. I don't have a detailed picture.
Right.
I have a simple picture. And so when I look at a business, I'll say distribution, and I've got a couple of key metrics. So I only had 10 things I wanted to change in this business.
Right.
10's a lot, but I had 10 things. And one of it was we had at that stage a prospect pool of 20,000 businesses that we could phone and contact. And I said to the team, we need to take it to 50,000. So that was my number, from 20 to 50. So half the stuff was short-term structural changes, fixing reporting lines, fixing responsibilities, scoping, that sort of stuff. And the other half was strategic stuff. The strategic stuff was no paper. And that's not difficult to remember in the picture. But the knock-on effect of reducing paper in the organization means you're forced to digitize, which means you're forced to automate processes. You're forced to automate decision-making. You're forced to... So the no paper becomes a philosophy which you drive. Culture, so is a big one. How do you make sure people enjoy what they're doing? So the first thing we did is we sat down and we said, how do we get a metric to work out how engaged people are? So we did a survey, and we were literally 2 months into the business, and I wanted to do the survey as a baseline before I changed anything. So I stepped into the environment and we said, we did two things. We did a Q12 survey. Q12, and people can Google it, is the 12 most important questions that you can ask on staff engagement.
Oh, wow.
And it covers things like, do I have the tools I require to do my job? Is one question. Do I trust my co-workers to do work with me? Do I have a best friend at work? Have I had any recognition in the last 7 days? So by asking these 12 questions, you can very quickly get a picture across your whole organization where the holes are and how engaged people are. We also then asked the net promoter score question. but for staff, not for customers, for staff.
Oh, you did an internal NPS?
Internal.
Wow.
And it was one question. How likely are you to encourage your friends and family to come and work for Retail Capital?
100%. 100%. Okay.
So our first NPS was a negative score. we had more detractors than promoters.
And you were paying them.
Absolutely. But it gives you a quick metric in your culture. And then we spent the next 6 months saying, where are the holes? So people said they don't have the tools to do the job. So now we're going to understand, what tools do you need to do your job? And that's simple stuff to fix, because you can say, well, I can't get access to the internet because the internet's down all the time.
Let me ask you a question. How do you know the feedback you're getting is correct?
Okay, so everything's relative. You're never 100% sure it's always going to be correct, but it's relative.
Right.
So the first thing we did is we made sure that it's anonymous. So we split it by department, but we'd only look at it at a department score if there were at least, I think, between 3 or 4 responders.
Right.
So you couldn't pick who the person was.
Right.
And then we ran the exercise. We then ran the exercise 6 months later and did the relative check. So what improved, what didn't improve. So if they're lying to you consistently, then things shouldn't change.
Sure.
But things did change. And there were a handful of things that came out which we had to fix, and we fixed, and we gave feedback to the people about it. And it's incredible how quickly that mindset has shifted.
Did you have to let some people go?
So everyone needs the opportunity to perform. So we don't, as a philosophy, we don't just take people out of the business because we think they're the wrong people. We give them every opportunity to perform. And people then ultimately self-select where they want to be, they don't want to be there. So expand on that. So
self-select.
They self-select.
I can't imagine going to the CCMA and saying, I didn't fire him. He self-selected not to be here. So, how does that work? Is that I've never seen the resignation letter.
Yeah,
it says I'm self-selected.
That's a good question. So when you walk a journey with someone and people understand that they have areas they're not strong at and areas they're strong at. Yeah. And if you've got people in the right boxes and they're performing, it's a non-issue. If you put them in a box that they want to be in, but they're not hitting the performance requirements or not adjusting to the culture, or at some point you're going to have a conversation. And the conversation shouldn't be a surprise. When I sit down and say to you, I don't think this is the role for you. Now, we can make it easier for them and help them find another role, internally or externally. But you've got to have those honest conversations.
Jeez, that's tough, eh?
It is
How
tough.
do you manage spillage? So we find that with growth entrepreneurs, typically they start at a size and they have people that fit the pie. But the pie grows, and they don't always have the resources to scale up the number of people. And even if they do, there's a lag process because you've got to go through the recruiting process, finding people, yada, yada. So invariably what happens is parts of the pie, as it grows, then get done by people who weren't originally scoped to do that work. How do you, have you ever come across that, and how did you manage?
All the time.
So how do you manage that, right? How do you manage but this really isn't a part of my job conversation.
So, firstly, the people that you have in the organization need to be adaptable. So, if and their job isn't that one page on the back of the contract that says these are the 5 things that I do and I don't do anything else.
Right.
If you run an organization like that, then you have a corporate and you've got the wrong people in the organization. Okay, so people need to be adaptable and they need to be able to absorb whatever comes their way. Often people have to do things that they don't have the skill set for. Adaptable people will learn. I mean, we have individuals in the business that will sit at night and watch YouTube videos to train themselves. And that's the culture you need to create, is where there's a constant learning. And you see in a growth business, people either grow into the role with the organization or you get left behind.
Right.
And we've had instances where you've put in a collections manager and 2 years later they're now a collections supervisor because they actually have the business outgrown them.
Oh, I see.
Technologically, operationally, and then you got to have the hard conversation saying, you were great in that role, but you're not great anymore in that role.
Yeah.
So we can either try and train you up, or you need to accept that we're going to put someone above you.
Yeah.
Those are hard conversations.
Yeah.
But you have to be authentic about them.
Yeah. Off the record, you had a conversation with me about survival mode and the breakfast analogy. Did you, on the record now, tell us a bit more about it?
Sure. So when I sit with entrepreneurs, if people wait for the best time to start a business, they never start it. Okay, so when I say to entrepreneurs...
I told you guys, didn't I tell you? Gems, I told you.
If you plan to start a business, the only way to do it is to throw yourself in it completely and commit.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And that means resign your job, put money in the bank and start spending money. Once you start spending money, you get into survival mode where you have to survive. You don't have alternatives. And that's very powerful instinct. So really what I say to people is, when you have breakfast and you're having bacon and eggs, where the egg's involved, the chicken was involved in laying the egg. The pig was committed. The pig had to die to make breakfast for you. So I say to entrepreneurs, are you the chicken or the egg? Oh, sorry, the chicken or the pig?
Yeah.
Because you need to be the pig. You need to be committed.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as the part-time entrepreneur. You might get lucky, but generally, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you've got to commit.
Sure. Finally, before we break, earlier you were having a conversation about how you sort of built the business and you bolted on stuff, and you spoke about the case philosophy. What's the case philosophy?
Case philosophy stands for copy and steal everything. Basically, there's very little new stuff in the world. So use your networks and just Google and learn from others.
Yeah, and it's so important because a lot of us, I think, get caught in the trap of origination. We go, I've got a problem and I'm trying to solve it. And then we assume we're the first person ever to try and solve this problem.
Exactly.
And then you go native and you want to build some sort of native system when somebody's 15 years down the path with something far more advanced that you could probably just go to market and get off the shelf. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So when we come back, I want to have a conversation with Karl about the future. So what's the future for the business? What is he busy with now? What's the future for South Africa? Don't go away.